Hello, everybody, and welcome to a workshop on how to do research and get published. Thank you for joining us. Today, we're focusing on what it takes to get published in academic journals, specifically what open access is and the difference between any publication charges or fees you may encounter. As you are getting ready to publish your manuscript and are narrowing in your journal of choice, you might face a variety of terminology in the submission guidelines about various costs associated with publication. Business models vary journal by journal and publisher by publisher. So here we break down the definitions of possibly fees you may encounter as you decide which journal you should submit to. For those new to publishing, the terminology may be confusing, and we want to help ensure that we're all on the same page. Depending on where you want to submit, you may even consider building the cost into your funding application. But before we get started, I'd like to introduce you to our team. Today, we're joined by Alex Morrison, a publishing editor on the STM Journal's editorial team. He manages a range of scientific and medical journals and has a background in content management, magazine publishing, and literary publishing. Also joined by Thomas Faust, the Director of Insights and Strategy for the Gold Open Access team at Sage. He previously worked on open access journals across a number of other scientific publishers. In his role, he engages with stakeholders and analysts to interpret internal and external publishing data to inform business decisions affecting the portfolio, which helps shape Sage's approach to the Gold Open Access pricing. We're also joined by Lucy Price, a senior marketing manager at Sage, who has worked across open access and journals publishing, as well as on academic books. And last, I am Sean Scarsbrick, a marketing manager on the author marketing team at Sage. My primary role is to provide support to authors and reviewers as they move through the publishing process, with a particular focus on providing targeted resources at the appropriate time in the publication process. Today's call will have a presentation followed by a Q&A, and throughout the webinar today, please submit your questions using the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. If you see any questions that have been asked in the chat that you find particularly helpful or would really like to be addressed, please do like or upvote them, and we'll start with those at the end. It's also worth noting that unfortunately at this time we cannot provide personalized certificates for joining the webinar, although we will send out a generic certificate to everybody who is in attendance today. Now, to get started, you'll see a timeline of the typical author journey, moving from the very early stages of securing funding, conducting research, all the way through peer review and publication. Today, we're focusing on what open access is and the difference between any publication charges or fees you may encounter. We encourage you to go back and watch recordings of other topics we've covered in the series, including how to write and format a manuscript and how to navigate the peer review process. And with that, I'll pass it to my colleague, Alex.
Thank you, Sean. So before we dive in, it's worth spending a little time talking about how the subscription and open access models, and open access, we might refer to it as OA during this presentation. But talking about how subscription and OA models are the same and how they differ, because this is one of the most important issues in our industry right now, and it has been for several years now. This is also the key to the rest of our discussion today. So in all cases, authors write, submit content, and if it's accepted, it's published and then made available to readers. In the subscription model, the readers pay for access. The publisher's job is to publish interesting content for their readers. This content is kept behind a paywall, and in order to access it, a reader must have a subscription, either through their institution or as an individual. Some journals print issues and mail them out to their readers, similar to magazines, while other journals are online only. The subscription model has been around for as long as academic journals have been around, over 100 years. Now, in the open access model, authors pay the publisher to publish. Frequently, they will have financial support from their institution or other funders. The publisher's job is then to publish what's valid with some caveats, and authors are the customers in this sense. The content is then freely available online for anyone to read. No logins or subscriptions are required. Most open access journals are online only, and many have eliminated issues entirely. Open access works very well on the internet, but didn't work well pre-internet. So it's relatively new and only really started gaining traction in 2008. The open access movement has gained a lot of steam around the world recently. Different publishers are engaging in open access options in different ways. Sage was a founding board member of the Open Access Scholarly Publishing Association in 2008. We also launched Sage Open, which is the first OA journal publishing the full spectrum of social and behavioral science content, and we opened that in 2010. Fast forward to now, Sage publishes over 200 gold OA journals, and we'll dive more into what that means, but gold refers to journals that are fully open access, typically by virtue of an article processing charge to authors. Currently, Sage is engaging with the OA movements around the globe and with thought leaders involved in Plan S, which is the movement mainly based in Europe to push journal content towards OA, as well as with the US Office of Science and Technology as the United States forms a more cohesive strategy around OA. At last count, we have 52 active open access agreements in 32 countries across the globe, and more are sure to come, although how fast and how far reaching is yet to be seen. Sage, authors have many options when it comes to publishing, and authors can publish either in a fully open access journal or they can publish open access in a traditional subscription journal, which is known as a hybrid, or at Sage, we call it Sage Choice. In open access, authors pay an article processing charge, also known as an APC. APCs vary, but this could be discounted or waived, for example, if your institution has a deal with Sage. In terms of publishing options, there are 3 different publishing routes that exist for Sage authors. There's Gold OA, which means that the author's paper is included within one of Sage's pure Gold OA titles. Hybrid OA, or the Sage Choice option, allows authors to publish an OA article in any of our hybrid journals, which include OA articles within subscription journals. And finally, the Green OA access, the Green OA option enables you to share or deposit the original submission or accepted manuscript at any time after your article is accepted for publication at Sage. So publishing your open access publishing your article open access means that your research will be free to read, copy, and reuse, and can be shared by anyone, anywhere in the world. In fact, studies show that publishing your article open access will increase the usage and impact of your research, as everyone can benefit from reading and using your research immediately, maximizing dissemination and contributing to the fast advancement of scientific discovery. Some authors also choose to publish open access to meet funder open access policy requirements. Many funding bodies require research conducted with their funding to be published open access and may also require research to be published under a particular Creative Commons license. There also may be national requirements as well. Under a Creative Commons license, authors retain more control over rights to distribute and reuse their intellectual property. Plus, it allows the general public to access research. Research is often paid for by taxpayers, so the general public have a right to access this research. Last but not least, OA journals go through the same rigorous peer review process as used for other journals. The highest academic standards are always maintained, and each journal that reaches peer review is assessed by a minimum of 2 independent reviewers, both of whom have specialist knowledge of the subject area. Reviewers often suggest ways in which authors can improve their manuscripts, as well as advising our editors on which manuscripts are ultimately worthy of publication. So open access publication is usually subject to payment of an article processing charge, an APC, which we've mentioned before. And this is a fee that must be paid by the author, institution, or funding body in order to publish an article. Open access. At Sage, open access publication is available through the 3 routes just mentioned: Gold Open Access, Sage Choice or Hybrid Open Access, and the Green Open Access option. APCs can vary from journal to journal, so it is always important to check the journal's individual website to find out their current APC. The author pays model is sometimes accused of being vanity publishing or pay to publish. When revenue is directly dependent on the number of accepted papers, editorial integrity can be called into question. There is, of course, a strong financial incentive to accept all papers, regardless of quality. However, reputable publishers address this problem by completely separating the editorial and commerce aspect of the submission process. Content is purely under the jurisdiction of the editors, while APCs are collected by the publisher, and only after an article has been accepted. The acceptance rate and any financial benefit that the editors may receive should be entirely disconnected from each other. For gold open access journals, the APC is payable after acceptance of the article and before publication. For hybrid open access or Sage Choice, the article can be made open access on publication or can be requested to be made open access after publication. Although accessing open access research is free, there are costs at every stage of the publication process. This includes, but is not limited to, running peer review systems, copy editing and typesetting, hosting the article in perpetuity on dedicated servers, as well as marketing. Article processing charges support all of these costs. Note that some journals, note that some journals value added text or VAT that must be added to APCs. So please do check the individual journal homepage for clarification and the most up-to-date pricing. Next slide. Thank you. When publishing open access, this allows you to publish your article under Creative Commons license or CC license. This allows the research to be freely accessible and available to all readers, and even allows others to reuse content again. Gold open access journals, in particular, publish all of their content open access under a Creative Commons license, and therefore most gold open access journals charge an article processing charge payable by the author, institution, or funding body. Most journals are also members of the Committee on Publication Ethics, or COPE, and each journal's peer review policy is outlined in the journal's manuscript submissions guidelines, which can be found on the individual journal's website on Sage Journals. Creative Commons licenses allow authors to retain copyright of their work while allowing others to copy, distribute, and make some use of their work. The most common are the Creative Commons Attribution, CC-BY, and the Creative Commons Attribution Non-Commercial, CC-BY-NC licenses. Your funder may require that you choose a particular license. It's important to note that without a CC license or similar, an article is not considered open access, just free to read. The distinction between free to read and true OA is the ability to freely reuse the content. While different versions of the CC licenses have various restrictions, such as restricting commercial reuse, their purpose is to allow the authors and others to reuse, repost, and distribute the research content. Open access articles are published under one of several Creative Commons licenses, ensuring authors retain that copyright of their work while allowing others to copy, distribute, and reuse with adequate citation. Sage's default license option is the CC-BY-NC, which prevents others using the work for commercial purposes. Other CC licenses can be mandated by funders, journals, or open access agreements. The Open Access portal presents authors the choice of license options specified by these requirements. To go over some of these license options, the CC-BY, for the CC-BY, content may be copied, adapted, displayed, distributed, republished, or otherwise reused for any purpose, including for adaptation and commercial use, provided the content is attributed. For the CC-BY-NC, this is the same, but provided the purpose of these activities is not for commercial use. Commercial use means the use of the content by a commercial organization or individual for direct or indirect commercial gain or remuneration. CCBY-ND is the same as the CCBY, again, but provided the reuse is not an adaptation or derivative and the integrity of the original work is maintained. To create an adaptation, translation, or derivative of the original work, further permission is required from the publisher. CCBY, NC, and ND combines the same restrictions of the CCBY, NC and the CCBY, ND. CCBY IGO conveys all of the reuse rights that the CCBY license and is used by intergovernmental organizations such as the United Nations, World Bank, and the World Health Organization. And finally, the CCBY SA, for that one, SA stands for share alike. So if you remix, transform, or build upon the material, you must distribute your contributions under the same license as the original. Look at some examples of commercial reuse. Republication of content in a work or product available for sale. Republication of content in presentations, brochures, or other marketing materials by a commercial entity or by any entity for commercial purposes. Distribution of the content to promote or market a person, product, course, service, organization. Text and data mining for the purpose of creating a saleable product or product which benefits from promotional or advertising revenue. Use of the content by a commercial entity or individual for the purposes of remuneration, directly or indirectly through sale, licensing, promotion, or advertising. Authors of papers published with a non-commercial NC or ND, no derivatives, specification may also reuse their work as stated under the Green Open Access Policy in the guidelines for SAGE authors. And with that, I will pass it on to Lucy.
Thanks, Alex. Many research funders have policies requiring you to make the article available open access and will therefore include open access publishing fees or article publishing charges, APCs, within the research grant. Your institution may also have an open access agreement with SAGE that covers some or all of the cost of publishing your article OA. If your institution isn't included in one of our OA agreements, it may have a central fund to support researchers who want to publish open access. These are usually managed by the institutional library, so this is a good place to start to find out what might be available to you. Second, you can check if you are eligible for any discounts. Before submitting, reach out to your institution and the journal to see if you are eligible for a discount. Open access agreements with institutions or consortia offer corresponding affiliated authors discounted rates or may pay the APC in full. If your institution has an open access agreement with SAGE that covers some or all of the cost of publishing your article OA, no action is required on your part, so long as you are the corresponding author at an agreement institution. For gold open access journals, authors affiliated with selected low-income countries may be eligible for discounted rates. Corresponding authors who reside in the countries described by the Research for Life programme publishing in one of SAGE's gold open access journals are typically eligible to receive full or partial APC waiver. These discounts are automatically applied without the need to apply. However, it is critical that you check your eligibility when you are just about to submit your manuscript, as the policy and included countries is subject to change. Research for Life themselves update the included countries on an annual basis. Some SAGE journals offer role-based discounts for editorial board members, reviewers, or students. Again, you should contact the journal's editorial office for details of this. Do confirm any discounts and waivers before submission so you know the APC you will be required to pay. If your manuscript is then accepted, you will be contacted through SAGE's open access portal, where you will be notified of any further steps required to complete your OA publication with SAGE. Finally, If you cannot pay the APC, you can still make your article free to read by submitting to a Sage subscription journal and depositing the article in your institution's repository under Sage's Green Open Access policy. And here you can see the world coverage of our current open access sales deals at Sage, with a large proportion of our deals in Europe and North America, and a considerable number of deals across Asia, Africa, South America, and Australia too. One of the main types of open access agreements is transformative agreements, which are also known as read and publish agreements. Transformative agreements seek to move away from subscriptions to transition subscription spending to pay for open access instead. These agreements allow authors from eligible institutions to publish open access in eligible journals at no extra cost to them. Consortia are increasingly requiring read and publish agreements. This is mainly due to national open access policy mandates and the market context in which they are working. So this is the Sage Open Access Portal, which is an online platform allowing authors to easily sign their open access Creative Commons license, nominate a bill payer of the APC, and complete payment. The portal automatically applies waivers and discounts, offers funder-compliant license options, and sends reminders when action is required. Authors will be contacted via email and guided through each step of the process with useful links and simple instructions. Authors will always be given any waiver or the highest discount they are eligible for. They will also be automatically told if no payment is necessary or another party has already met any payment due. Not only that, the portal ensures that they are meeting all known points of compliance, including any applicable taxes due on their APC. Plus, it will send automated reminders and updates on any activities relating to their articles in the portal. Once your article is accepted, following the peer review process, within a few days you will receive an email from openaccess@sagepub.com with a subject line of "Complete the open access process for your article." The email invites you to complete the open access process for your article Begin by clicking on the links provided. You can pay by credit card or send a final invoice, which can be paid via bank, wire transfer, or credit card. So a submission fee is a price an author pays to submit to the journal. Paying a submission fee does not guarantee acceptance and is often introduced to cover journal and peer review costs. This is separate from an APC or page charge fee. Page charges are not very common but still exist. Historically, page charges are introduced to cover the cost of printing an article. Page charges is a set price per published page incurred by authors, for instance, a $75 or $150 per page. Page charges are different from APCs in that page charges are paid by the author and mainly exist in traditional subscription journals. The author guidelines should be transparent in the price per page authors will incur, even though you may not get the final invoice until the article is copy edited and typeset. Page charges will only be charged if the paper has undergone peer review and is ultimately accepted. Colour charges. A vast majority of journals allow authors to publish images and figures in colour online at no cost. However, some journals may charge to publish images in the print edition in colour. For instance, some Sage publishing journals, this first colour image is $800 and it is $200 for any additional colour images within the same contribution. In some disciplines like pathology, colour images may be crucial to the article. In general, reusing or reproducing substantial portions of content requires permission, and authors are responsible for securing appropriate permissions. This includes use of text, figures, tables, multimedia content, and other material published by another author or journal. And in some instances, you may need to pay to reuse portions of this third-party material. Avoiding predatory publishers. With all of these charges, many are concerned about predatory publishers or fraudulent practices. Predatory companies take advantage of the crowded open access environment to launch journals with highly questionable practices. Some predatory titles list entirely fabricated editorial boards on their websites. Others might go further by listing real academics without their knowledge or consent. Pay-to-publish journals conduct little to no peer review and will accept any manuscript so long as the journal or the author is willing to pay the fee. Some predatory publishers even mimic existing high-quality peer-reviewed journals, even down to the journal logo. But as unnerving as this can be, a few simple tips can help you differentiate the good players from the bad. So first of all, consult a whitelist. There are sites that list trustworthy open access journals and publishers. The Directory of Open Access Journals is an excellent resource with very strict parameters for inclusion. The Directory of Open Access Journals links directly to the journal, so you can be sure you are not submitting to a mimic. Journal content appearing in reputable indexes such as PubMed or Scopus is also a good sign. Not to say that aren't problematic journals included in these indexes, as is membership to the Committee on Publication Ethics. Always check the actual index rather than relying on claims of indexing on the journal website. Trust reputable publishers. If you already know and trust a publisher and would submit to one of their subscription titles, you can trust their open access content as well. If you can't easily identify and contact the publisher from the journal webpage, this is probably a red flag. For instance, if you come across a website for a journal and the publisher's logo and branding are not prominently displayed, you are very likely on a predatory website. Verify editorial board members. Look for editorial board members' credentials online, and you should be able to see their institutions listed on their journal on the journal's website and find their faculty page at that institution. When in doubt, you can contact an editorial board member through their institution's page to confirm their board membership. Look for Creative Commons or similar licenses. The Creative Commons licenses allow content to be shared, reused, and adapted as much as possible, while still maintaining correct attribution. These and similar license types have become an industry standard for open access, and most predatory publishers don't actually use them. Transparency around policies in the author guidelines. Author instructions should clearly state the journal's ethical and peer review guidelines, as well as the article processing charge. If any of this information is missing, exercise caution. Hover over hyperlinks and URLs. Before you click on any link, hover your mouse over the URL and see if the text of the link in the email body matches the link address of the website to which you will be directed. Is it the same? Does the website use a secure certificate, e.g. HTTPS? Do these links seem to be related to the journal website, society website, and/or manuscript submissions website, if applicable? Examine spelling and grammar. One obvious red flag will be grammar and spelling errors. Are numerous words misspelled? Does the author of the email use poor grammar or have an unusually laudatory tone? These could be signs that the group reaching out is predatory. Focus on quality over speed, especially as you are getting ready to submit. Be wary of any groups offering to submit your paper on your behalf, and always check the journal's website directly to verify provided information. Do your due diligence and take time to make sure everything lines up. While it may take a few days to the process, it's better to be thorough than to rush into publication and never see your paper online, or worse, to be duped out of money. You can reach out to the journal editor directly or the publisher to verify and question any concerns you have. And finally, from me, if you take nothing else away from this webinar other than this, remember that transparency is key. The author guidelines and journal website will be very clear on what publications you can expect and when they will be rendered. When in doubt, contact the journal editorial office in case of confusion.
Thank you very much, Lucy. And with that, we're going to move into the Q&A portion of our webinar. But before we get there, I wanted to just flag that we are continuing our How to Do Research and Get Published webinar series next month. On November 12th, we'll have a webinar specifically on how to promote your article and impact policy. This one will be very useful to anybody who has already published, is in the process of publishing, and is looking to really reach policymakers with their work. So definitely sign up for that one, and we will send a link in the follow-up to this. In addition, keep an eye out on our Journal Author Gateway for all of our resources. You'll find dedicated support resources, more how to get published support. You'll learn how and when you can share your paper. And for anybody who reads simplified Chinese, we have a Chinese Author Gateway as well. So first, a thank you for joining today, and now we will move into the Q&A portion. So definitely continue to send over your questions in the chat so that we can pose it to our panelists. And I think a good question that we can start off here is about green OA options and preprint server policy. So I'm wondering if our panelists can speak a little bit to that and explain what it means.
Thanks, Sean. I think I can pick up on this one. So green open access is where an author deposits the author accepted version of their manuscript in a preprint server or institutional repository before that manuscript goes on to get copy edited and goes online on the publisher's website. So not all publishers support this route of green open access. Sage do on all of their subscription titles and open access titles. And that means that you could choose to deposit your article at the point of acceptance, or you could even choose to deposit it at the point of submission or even earlier if you wanted to get feedback on your article. So if you are struggling to get funds to publish in gold open access or to publish open access through your hybrid option, you could choose green open access as a way of maximizing the dissemination of that work without having to pay any article processing charges. So common preprint servers include, I saw in the chat, Archive, BioArchive, ChemArchive, but there's a variety of other ones. Some are subject specific, others are very open generalist and are open to all different subject areas, and some publishers even have their own preprint servers. So essentially, Sage is really supportive of green open access and definitely would encourage you to use that option. We think that's a really powerful tool for broadening the dissemination of research.
Great, thank you very much, Thomas. We have some other questions coming in about OA reputation, and I think this ties in very well with what Lucy had been speaking about predatory journals, but I'm wondering if you could flesh that out a little bit more fully. How do you know which journals to trust? How do you know who to trust?
This is incredibly difficult. Obviously, predatory journals and journals with bad agendas want to look like good journals. So there's some things that you have to do to be really careful that you're submitting to a good quality journal. First of all, I'd say talk to your colleagues, see if they're familiar with the journal. Do they know other people that have published in it? What have their experiences been? You could look through the table of contents and see if any of your colleagues have published in it previously or other players in the field that you respect. So just look into the community to see if they published there. You can also see if the journal's indexed in some of the major databases like PubMed, Scopus, Web of Science. That all adds legitimacy because there are internal checks for those databases before those journals can be admitted to those indexes. So that's really powerful. Look on the editorial board, see if there's names that you recognize or really big players in the field. That's going to add additional credence and additional legitimacy to the journal. And look at the transparency of their peer review process. I think Lucy picks up on that a little bit already. There are other third parties that can add legitimacy as well. There's the Director of Open Access Journals, DOAJ. They provide an index of reputable titles. And there's a really great website called Think, Check, Submit. So if you just Google Think, Check, Submit, it comes up with a much more comprehensive list of things you could do to check journals before you decide to submit with them. So I think there's a whole range of different things you can do, but definitely there's no substitute to speaking to colleagues in your field, other people in the department, and getting a feel for whether they had good experiences of publishing in that journal.
That's a great point, Alec. That's a great point, Thomas, because we see a lot of questions coming through about that and people talking about, that you've never published before, you're relying on your mentor for support, and definitely reaching out to your network for extra guidance is a great place to get started. Awesome. So we have another question that came through about what happens after acceptance and potentially getting a waiver then. So someone's asked, is it possible to apply for a waiver after your manuscript has already been accepted?
I can pick this one up. Please, please, please check the journal website at the point of submission and see what the publisher or the journal says about applying for a waiver. Some waivers are applied automatically based on the country that the corresponding author comes from. So for Sage, if you're from one of the eligible countries, we'll recognize that at the point of acceptance and waive the publication charges. But if you're not from one of those eligible countries, it's absolutely critical that you apply at the point of submission for one of those discretionary waivers. The vast majority of other publishers also have this policy as well. So it's really important that you get in touch with the publisher at the point of submission, or even before the point of submission, to see what support is available to you. Because what we don't want to do is have authors withdrawing their manuscripts partway through the submission process or partway through peer review when they realize they're going to have to pay an APC and the publisher's not able to support that. Of course, if you don't have funding available, there's all kinds of other avenues you can go in to try and find it, whether that's talking to your research institution, your libraries. Obviously, look up in advance of time whether your institution already has a deal in place with Sage. There's certain institutions where it's free to publish in our Gold Open Access titles already. So, but just my plea to you is please look these things up at the earliest possible opportunity at the point of submission, because there's absolutely no guarantee that a waiver request would be granted after acceptance.
Great, thank you for explaining that. I see a number of questions coming through about APC charges, of course, the center of today, but specifically wondering how much they are. Wondering if we could speak to that.
So maybe I'll talk about Gold, and then maybe Alex can talk a little bit about the cost of publishing hybrid. For the Gold Open Access portfolio, some of our titles are free to publish in, a so-called diamond model. And that means that the APCs are largely covered by a sponsoring society. Some of our APCs are very low. This is especially the case for journals which have recently launched. So they might have an introductory offer for the first 2 years of having no APC. It might be quite low because we're looking to encourage submissions. These are journals which are trying to get off the ground. I think the most any of our journals charge is $2,800. There are some titles which operate on page charges. These are ones with very intensive technical edits. And so there's no limit because it depends on the number of pages that are included. But I think, and Alex, maybe you can speak to this a little bit, the charges differ between Gold and hybrid. Maybe sometimes hybrid is a little bit more to take that Sage Choice option for publishing OA inside a subscription title.
Yeah, that's correct. To publish Sage Choice, it varies to publish OA in a hybrid journal, at least for Sage. So it's really important just to, every journal has a full set of manuscript submissions guidelines that you can find on the journal homepage. And all those charges are going to be any APCs, any potential page charges, any of those charges will be listed in the manuscript submission guidelines of the journal. So it's important to read those thoroughly because that's where that information is going to be, as those APCs are going to vary from journal to journal.
Great. Thank you, Alex. Thank you, Thomas. One thing I'd like to note is that I'm seeing a number of questions coming through about AI and artificial intelligence. At Sage, we have official guidance on this, which we have posted online, and I will share in the follow-up as well. As everybody in the call knows, AI is new and constantly changing, so this is the best spot to get the latest information and the most reliable updates from Sage. So I'll send those links to you all as part of the webinar follow-up. I see one question that I think is interesting. So obviously today we're talking about open access, and that's really the primary focus. But I see a question kind of on the flip side. We've spoken about a lot of advantages of publishing open access. You get more access across the board, things like that. But I'm curious if we could potentially speak to disadvantages of not publishing open access. So are there any disadvantages of publishing in a non-open access journal?
I can take this a little bit. So by publishing open access, it means that anyone, anywhere can access that research, can read it, reuse it, cite it, use it in there and really build upon it. If you publish with a subscription title, that means to read it, you either need to pay to access that individual article or your library needs to have a subscription for you to access it. So that means if there's somebody that doesn't have a subscription to that journal, they're not able to read your research, to cite it, to build upon it. So you're limiting the breadth or the reach of your article and limiting its impact by only making it available to a certain set of readers. Maybe another thing is, if it doesn't come along with one of those Creative Commons licenses, it limits the reuse that can be applied to that piece of research. So I saw there was another question. Maybe I'll cover one of the questions which came up in the Q&A as well, which was about the Creative Commons licenses. So when you choose to publish open access with Sage, our default license is a CC BY NC, which means if someone wants to reuse your work, first of all, it needs to adhere to the BY section, which is just attribution. It means you need to say, this piece of research was done by these researchers, and here's a citation to it, so anyone can go back and see the original research. And the NC part means it's non-commercial. That is, nobody else can reuse that work for commercial purposes. So if I was a researcher, I could print out the paper and give it to, I don't know, my research group, or if I was teaching, I could give it out to the whole class. But if it says NC, I couldn't copy that paper and then publish it in a textbook and sell that textbook, because that would be contravening the non-commercial aspect of that license. So these Creative Commons licenses, Creative Commons is just the organization, so which comes up with these different license types. You don't typically get one of these Creative Commons licenses if you publish within a subscription title. It's not part of the package that you're signing up for when you do that. So by publishing open access, you're enhancing not only the discoverability, but also the reuse and the opportunity to build upon that work.
It's a good time to put a reminder that is the key difference between publishing open access and publishing an article that is simply free to read. So open access really isn't just about isn't just about the paywall or lack of paywall. It's really about that reuse policy as well that comes from that CC BY license.
Great. Thanks, Alex. Thanks, Thomas. Just as a flag to everybody on the call today, I see a number of questions coming through about recordings of the webinar. We will share a recording with everybody who's part of the call today, so don't worry, we'll send that over to you. I seen a question that came through about open access deals for institutions. I think this is a really interesting one. So as we discussed today, some universities, some consortia have agreements with publishers. Sage has, I think, 52 in total. Is there a quota set on the amount of articles that could be published without cost by researchers? And how does this work? And is this general, or is this different deal by deal?
I can answer for the gold open access. So there's two kinds of deal which are commonly in place. One is publishing hybrid within subscription titles, and the other is publishing open access within the gold open access portfolios. That's journals which only publish open access content. For those gold titles which only publish open access content, all of our deals are unlimited. That is, if you're from an institution with a deal for publishing in gold open access, there's no limit on the number of articles that can be published there. There's some other deals where the institutions have a discount. I think it's typically 20% for publishing within gold open access. And again, that's not limited, but I'm maybe going to hand over to Alex for what happens on the hybrid side, because I think it might be slightly different potentially.
Mm-hmm. For hybrid, I will want to answer that one later in an email. I'll revisit that and we can email that answer out later.
Great, thank you. So I see a number of questions coming through from people who write that they're in lower income countries, that they're and they're interested in what options might be available to them, or potentially if there are any strategies they may use to overcome funding barriers. So I'm curious, Thomas, Alex, is there something that you could speak to on this?
I would say go to our website and look up our policy. We try to support researchers from developing countries to publish within our journals, within our open access portfolio. We have a number of initiatives to support that, whether you're eligible for a full waiver or potentially a discount. And if that isn't available to you, you're not from one of those countries, then we've already mentioned the green open access route. You can publish within one of our subscription titles, but still deposit the author accepted version of your manuscript in a preprint server or institutional repository to kind of broaden the dissemination that way. It's not quite as good as publishing gold open access because it's not the copy edited version which goes on the publisher's website that becomes available, but it's still a good route to making sure that you can disseminate that research quite widely.
Actually, corresponding authors who reside in countries described by the Research for Life program, if they publish in Sage's Gold open access journals, they're typically eligible to receive full or partial APC waivers. So, and that discount is automatically applied without the need to apply. However, it's critical that you check your eligibility when you're submitting your manuscript. And so that's through the Research for Life program. And they keep an updated list of included countries on an annual basis.
Great, thank you. I think we've got time. I'm going to ask one more question. And I think this is a really interesting one that kind of ties in with a lot of the themes that we've discussed today. It has to do with paying article processing charges. And the person asked here, how can publishers guarantee that article processing charges and open access don't lead to commercialization of scientific research in favor of authenticity?
This is a really interesting question. So obviously in the old world where all journals were sold as subscriptions to libraries, there was an impetus to publish the best quality research, to make sure that all research was really essential for the research community, and that it was a must-have journal for the university, for the researchers. And so the libraries really needed to subscribe to every single journal. There's been a bit of a shift in perception about, not just with the open access movement, but in general, saying that every piece of research has value. So in the old world, potentially you would only publish research which is the most impactful, has a real impact on people's day-to-day lives, is really going to change thinking in the field. But that means we're not publishing null results that are maybe less impactful for a broad audience, or only really of interest to specific people within a field. And that's not ideal. We really need to make sure that all research is published. If you do an experiment and you find out that what you're hoping to happen didn't happen, it's important to put that out into the scientific corpus so that other people don't try and reproduce that, or other people can scrutinize the work you've done and try and build upon it, or try and find a way around it, but without necessarily wasting a lot of taxpayers' money in trying to reproduce work that isn't going to be fruitful. So there's kind of been a realization that all valid, all technically sound research deserves to be published somewhere. So that's the first thing I'd say. But you also have to acknowledge that in a world where publishers are being paid based on the volume of articles they're accepting and publishing, there could be a perverse incentive whereby publishers are publishing any nonsense regardless of what's submitted. It's like vanity publishing, if you like. And this is, some publishers have become a cropper because they have been doing this volume over quality equation and getting it completely wrong. Sage are really committed to making sure that every single article that we publish is ethically sound, is making a contribution to the scientific corpus, which doing things like making sure that authors are legitimate. We're doing lots of verification work, making sure that even if it's a null result or it's a negative result, making sure that that does represent an advancement for the field, and making sure that it's an important contribution that we're publishing. But look, each publisher is going to have to make difficult decisions and make sure that they are putting the checks and measures in place to make sure that they are really contributing to the community and providing a service to researchers and universities, institutions, to make sure that that's happening. I would say just look at the publishers, look at the content that they're publishing, and see whether you think those publishers are adhering to those really important scientific principles before you submit to them.
I'll add, it's really important to remember that how important it is for publishers to separate, the jurisdiction of editorial from the APC and the financial aspect. So ensuring that content is still purely under the jurisdiction of editors, and that the journals are being fully transparent about their peer review process, and not just accepting anything that comes in or guaranteeing acceptance upon submission. So being clear about their peer review standards and their editorial standards, and ensuring that the APC and financial aspect is separate from that.
I'd agree. You can also pick up on some of these aspects according to how quickly articles get published. If you want to only publish really great quality work, it takes time to put that through peer review, to secure 2 peer review reports, to get an editor to do a really robust analysis of the work that's being done. These things take time. I saw there's a question about turnaround times in the Q&A as well. So typically it might take 80, 100, maybe even 200 days to get an article all the way from submission through to publication. Other publishers that don't put that level of scrutiny will have much shorter turnaround times because they're incentive is to publish very quickly to recognize that APC revenue. That's not where Sage is, but that is a marker, sometimes a problematic marker for journals which are cutting corners in the pursuit of volume over quality. And that's really not something that Sage looks to do at all.
Great. And that's a great place to end. So thank you very much to our panelists. Thank you to Thomas, to Alex, and Lucy for your great presentation today and very engaging Q&A. Thank you to everybody who has joined us and for all of your excellent questions. Please do join us at future How to Do Research and Get Published webinars. As I said, we've got one next month, and we've got tons planned for next year. So hopefully we'll see you in a future one. And in the meantime, take care.